Kansas City is one of America's most peaceful and beautiful large cities. Rarely does an incident of violence hurl Kansas City into the glare of national news headlines. But late in the summer of 1959, a spark touched off a raging inferno which killed 6 brave men and injured more than 100. Some of the men you'll be seeing in the news coverage of this tragedy are now dead. This is a presentation of KMBC TV in Kansas City, Missouri. This is where tragedy struck in Kansas City. It's shortly after 9 o'clock, the morning of Tuesday, August 18th, 1959. The location, busy Southwest Boulevard on the Kansas side of the Missouri-Kansas line. This is what is left of a service station and bulk gasoline storage plant. The fire has been raging for an hour. It apparently began when 2 men were loading gasoline into a tank truck on the service station drive. These 3 men later died. The heat of the fire, combined with a fierce heat from the sun, made the fire line an extremely hot place. Dozens of firemen had already dropped from heat exhaustion and smoke inhalation. Ambulances were moving in a steady stream to and from 11 Kansas City hospitals. They couldn't arrive fast enough to accommodate all the injured firemen. They had been carried away from their stations and placed in the shade, where their fellow firemen could administer oxygen and other first aid. The temperature in Kansas City that morning was extremely high, and these firemen could really feel it. 19 companies from both Kansas City, Kansas and Kansas City, Missouri were there. Many had fallen. More were to fall before this one was whipped. The high number of injuries brought a call for all available ambulances in greater Kansas City. Linemen from utility companies had to sever burning wires, which were further endangering the firefighters. Still the fire raged, although the firemen had been able to keep the flames away from the huge gasoline tanks. Each of these tanks had 21,000-gallon capacity. That was where the big fight was centered. The firefighters used fog nozzles to reduce the water to a fine spray, to smother the fire, and to try to keep the tanks cool. Here, the camera saw the fire from the fireman's point of view. At this point, deadly gasoline was 74 feet straight ahead. These also are about to be fatal victims of the fire. Hundreds of feet of hose were used in the big fight. Some of the lines had to be drawn from 2 blocks away from the fire. Much of this hose was to be destroyed later. Several of the men manning the hose were to die. Searing heat blistered the faces of these men. They had to leave the fire line every few minutes and seek relief from the heat. Then back to the grim business of protecting our city. For some, the final face-washing of their lives. Danger was everywhere. Suddenly, the flames brightened. It was apparent the fire had eaten its way to one of the big tanks. The fireball that went up was evidence the fire had found a new fuel supply. Minutes ago, firemen had the situation under control. In seconds, they'll be running for their lives. One explosion and a fireball, followed by another, sent the flames hundreds of feet into the air, visible for 15 miles in all directions. This was dangerous. Still, the firemen stayed at their posts. They continued to battle this giant, which now threatened to consume them. The roar of the flames was similar to the sound of a large jet airplane. Fire experts say this was a stream of liquid fire spewing out the back of the tank, which was already badly ruptured. Fire chiefs ordered their men back, but sadly, not in time. And there it goes. The flames engulfed 6 firemen who tried to run. They couldn't get away from this inferno. They tripped as they tried blindly to get away. Assistants knocked some of them down and tried to beat out the flames. One man was a human torch. Their screams will haunt many men for many years to come. Ambulances, which had waited in line, now rushed into the fire area. As quickly as injured firemen could be dragged from the flames, they were rushed to hospitals. 12 were hurt critically. 6 of them were to die in the few days following this tragedy. Doctors, firemen, and police crowded around the casualties. For those less seriously hurt, first aid was given, so that ambulances might take the most critically injured first. The faces of some were so badly burned, oxygen couldn't be administered. 6 received the last rites of the Catholic Church at the scene. 2 of these men lived only 3 hours. 4 others lived as long as 6 days. Others were less seriously hurt, but would have to be hospital patients for some time. For the others, more ambulances arrived. Burns on the face and arms were agonizing for one injured firefighter. He would be in bed for a long time if he was lucky enough to live. Another fireman was so badly burned about the back that he rode to the hospital on his stomach. He received medical treatment on the way. The property damage was not too spectacular in terms of physical equipment. 2 trucks, 2 cars, the service station, the gasoline storage tank, and 1 large fire truck, which was caught in the big explosion. But the human misery and loss of life can never be measured in dollars and cents. Debris from the explosion was scattered over a wide area. The huge gasoline tank was ripped apart and moved 94 feet as it overran the firemen's positions. But there was still a fire to be fought. Much water was still needed. The firemen went back to work with a grim tenacity. Less than an hour later, they had the situation under control for the final time. Had the explosion come in a slightly different position, KMBC TV news cameraman Joe Adams would surely have been among the casualties. In slow motion, the build-up to the explosion began this way. The flames, which had appeared to be under control minutes earlier, had found a new fuel supply. This was accompanied by a loud noise, which sounded almost identical to the sound of a jet airplane. At this point, most of the people at the scene began moving back. Then it happened. The huge gasoline tank burst, sending a stream of blazing fuel across the street, surrounding the helpless firemen in a sea of flame. The tank actually shot forward. The firemen were 74 feet from the tank. It moved 94 feet, overrunning their line by some 20 feet. One man was afire. He was one of the 6 who died later. Helmets and boots, still smoldering, were silent witness to the agony endured by their owners. This has been a presentation of KMBC TV News, Kansas City, Missouri.
The somber sense of what happened that day still shows in the faces all these years later.
Our God and Father, today we submit ourselves humbly before you.
It was their grandfathers who died, their loved ones, their friends, men whose safety was always uncertain.
Our families live with that uncertainty every time we go to work.
It's the danger firefighter Doc Stokes faced firsthand that day.
Now, we come down here, we thought it would be a piece of cake, you know.
This is where tragedy struck in Kansas City.
Boy, we got down and saw this, what was happening,
Dozens of firemen had already dropped from heat exhaustion and smoke inhalation.
and that thing blew up.
And there it goes. The flames engulfed 6 firemen who tried to run.
The ball of fire come right at us,
They couldn't get away from this inferno.
and I don't know why I didn't get burned up.
6 men did die that day.
Captain George Bartels, Captain Pete Cerna, firefighter Neil Owen, firefighter Virgil Sams, firefighter Delbert Stone, and Francis Toombs.
Now their memory is etched in stone. A monument finally stands 40 years after the fact. But time doesn't lessen the price paid by the firefighters.
That was not a good day.
Jeremy Hubbard, KMBC 9 News.